What fan theory do you 100% accept as true? Kermit caused 9/11, not really much of a fan theory though since it's unintentionally canon. Cullen realized this should be explained. In the 2002 TV film It's a Very Merry Muppet Christmas Movie, there's a part where an angel shows Kermit an alternate reality where he was never born. For whatever reason, the editors didn't really think about it, and continued to use footage with the Twin Towers still standing for this scene, however they aren't there in his original universe. Therefore, something that Kermit did in his life, did in fact cause 9/11 in Muppet lore. Realize this should be explained. Lamau. Andy's parents are in the middle of a divorce when the first Toy Story is taking place. I remember asking my parents why is it just Andy and his mom, and then they said well some people live like that. Willy Wonka knew what he was doing. There was no seat for Augustus aboard that boat. He knew Augustus Gloop would fall in there. Oh yay, this is absolutely true. It's why each kid had their own downfall specifically programmed into the tour. That's why he seemed bored by the end too. He was just weeding out the kids that weren't worthy. It's been a while since I watched it, but did they ever get to one to test Charlie? The fizzy lifting drinks thing was Uncle Joe being a bad influence, wasn't it? I don't think that was meant to be Charlie's downfall, otherwise how was there still room for him in the tour past that and whatnot? This also brings up the end game of the movie into question though. Was there a challenge meant for Charlie we didn't see, or was it actually just giving back the gobstopper? Slugworth was going to pay handsomely for it, so I assume if poor Charlie gave it back to Wonka that was him passing his test. The fizzy lifting drink just pissed off Wonka, I guess. That was never supposed to happen, I don't think. Glinda dropped Dorothy's house on the Wicked Witch of the East, not the tornado, and uses her to gain control of Oz. One of the first things Glinda tells Dorothy is that she killed the witch. They praise her so she'll accept it, and when the Witch of the West comes along, who killed her sister? Dorothy. Glinda then puts the ruby slippers on Dorothy's feet but does not tell her that she can use them to go home. Instead, she sends Dorothy to Oz in possession of objects that a witch would murder her for. Dorothy, being forced into a situation where her only salvation is Oz and her worst enemy is the Queen, inadvertently exposes the Wizard of Oz as a fraud and murders the Witch of the West. Now, who's left to rule Oz? Glinda fucking Witch of the North. She used Dorothy as an expendable pawn to gain control of Oz without having to leave her bubble. And when Dorothy is done upheaving the two biggest powers in Oz, Glinda sends her home and makes her think it was all a dream. Scooby-Doo is a show about draft dodgers during the Vietnam War. I mean, don't know about the others, but Shaggy enlists at the very least and does time in a training camp. I also remember a theory that it takes place during a severe economic downturn. How else do you explain all the abandoned houses and barns and airfields and such, along with a glut of desperate criminals in what seems to be a fairly small town? Barney from How I Met Your Mother isn't actually as much of a womanizer as Ted says he is. Ted's an unreliable narrator and could have presented this image of Barney to his kids either because he was jealous of Barney's relationship with Robin, or because he wants Barney to look unsuitable for her. That way, Ted's kids see Ted and Robin as soulmates. I've heard the theory that Ted put all his one-night stand stories on Barney so he doesn't look bad/manipulative in front of his kids, meaning like 50% of the stories of Barney manipulating women are Ted lying to women to get laid. The real world in the Matrix movies is just another layer of the Matrix, designed specifically to appeal to people unwilling to conform to the normal matrix. Humans in this outer matrix have confirmation of their belief that something was wrong, and get to indulge in the fantasy of being a heroic freedom fighter against the faceless evil machines, thus choosing to accept this false reality. The anomaly of the one is that he's capable of rejecting both realities, which is the reason why he had powers in the real world. Yeah, did Revolutions ever address this? I thought the cliffhanger ending of Reloaded was meant to reveal that the real world was just another matrix. The Last Airbender is not, as many have suspected, meant to be a big screen version of the TV show of the same name. It is, in fact, a subtle but clear adaptation of the show's episode The Ember Island Players, in which a poorly informed in-universe theater troupe recap the events of the series in an inaccurate and comedic style. Mr. Bean is an alien. That would explain his weird behavior and why he falls out of the sky at the beginning of every episode. Not an angel instead? He falls from the sky to the sound of a choir. This is actually confirmed in the animated series where we see numerous Mr. Beans in a UFO. This was a Reddit post a while ago actually, but the theory was, in Empire Strikes Back, when Luke tells R2 to stay in the ship at various times, he doesn't stay put, because the last person to tell him that was Anakin and he never came back. My favorite R2 theory is that in A New Hope when he and Obi-Wan meet again, that unlike C-3PO, R2's memory was never erased but they pretend not to know each other, This is obviously because the finer details of the prequel trilogy weren't ironed out when A New Hope was originally released. Now the widely accepted fan theory is that Obi-Wan says nothing because he doesn't want Luke to know who he is and what his relationship was to Anakin, so as to keep him from being corrupted by the influence of the dark side. Whereas R2 doesn't give anything away because he ain't no fucking snitch. James Bond's primary purpose is to be a distraction to keep attention off the spies who actually spy. Villains and other spies know him. He rarely takes an alias. He makes his presence known early on and keeps messing up operations for the villains, but other spies have already infiltrated their ranks and work while Bond does as much visible damage as possible to keep the others safe. I like this one. When you think about it, he's a pretty bad spy. This is a little out there, but hear me out. The year 2015 we see in Back to the Future 2 is what would have happened if not for Chernobyl. Which leads to the argument that something in the movies, specifically 2 and 3, caused Chernobyl to happen. As you know, the year the characters are from is 1985, with Chernobyl happening in 1986. My take is, learning of the Libyans' attempt to procure plutonium, the Soviets sent a spy to Hill Valley to learn more in order to prevent destabilizing relations during the Cold War. The spy arrives late, and in the timeline established by just the first movie, leaves. This is the timeline we see in the second movie, which is eventually erased. However, Doc Brown meddles with time again, and causes the events of the second and thus third movie. The spy witnesses the end of the third movie with the flying train, and assumes it's a new sort of aircraft. He investigates the scene after the main characters depart and finds wreckage of the DeLorean. Among the wreckage is some parts of the destroyed fusion reactor. Relaying findings to the Soviets, they get the impression that the US is significantly ahead of them in nuclear development. To combat this, they aggressively greenlight a bunch of nuclear projects, including a risky test that results in the Chernobyl meltdown. The resulting event scares people the world over and hinders nuclear research and progression. With lack of funding and roadblocks to more nuclear proliferation, fusion technology is never developed. Thus hampered, the timeline turns into hours. In the 2015 timeline shown in BTTF2, the nuclear research breakthroughs make the rest of the technology possible, including flying cars and hoverboards. With some developments happening in the late 80s, the economy is lifted and the downturn of the early 90s does not happen. This has an effect of extending the garish fashion of the 80s forward, hence why the clothes look different as well. My own theory that in The Office when Andy proposes to Angela, the people playing his parents are different actors because they are literally actors. As in, he hired them to pose as his perfect parents because his own parents couldn't be bothered to come. The people in the season 9 episode Garden Party are his real parents, who clearly are dicks. This would actually make more sense. There's a talking head where he mentions his father had an affair by saying if it weren't for secretaries, I wouldn't have a stepmom. I always assumed it was a continuity error or that his biological mom and his stepdad were at the engagement and his stepmom and biological dad were at the garden party. But the way he interacts with them and his brother at the garden party and over the phone point to them being his real parents, making it a continuity problem. Your theory actually clears most of that up. The Jetsons and the Flintstones are living at the same time in a dystopian future where the haves live above the clouds and the have-nots are stuck on a wasted Earth. The signs include that Flintstones celebrate things like Christmas and other holidays, which doesn't make sense, and the Great Gazoo alien appears in both series. Mad Max folktale theory. The movies and games all have different narrators and different takes on Max because they're all stories being told by people in the wasteland. All of these great deeds and accomplishments are being attributed to one man who may or may not have ever really existed. Double Matrix theory. The Matrix has an inner core and then an outer shell designed to give the illusion of escape. It's basically a corral where they can keep the escaped humans until the defense mechanism, the machines, can purge them. This is why Neo could use his powers outside the Matrix, why Smith could leave, and why Cypher could go in without anyone noticing. That Matrix theory could very well be the plot of Matrix 4. The Paw Patrol pups are part of a post-AI initiative attempting to train enhanced, but subservient, companion animals to replace the robots that almost destroyed humanity. Everyone in Adventure Bay / Foggy Bottom / etc. are paid actors who place the pups and coordinated training exercises. Which is why Mayor Humdinger gets away with all his bullshit. Parenthood has melted my brain. As someone who watched way too many episodes of Paw Patrol, I believe it. I mean, how else can they make the graphic designs of plans in such a short notice? Joker from The Dark Knight was former military / CIA, which explains his skills in weapons and interrogation, as well as that comment about the truck full of soldiers. Also, his ability to keep his true identity undetected probably wasn't by accident either. George R.R. Martin is having a difficult time finishing A Song of Ice and Fire because the fans already guessed everything and he's forcing himself to change up the story. Similar to this one I saw, can't remember where, that George was trying out the ending he had in mind when he gave D&D the notes for the final half of the series. Apparently he gave them a summary of events and they filled in the blanks, and since it was so poorly received he's rewriting large chunks to fit a new ending. Bill Cipher is still alive inside Stan Pine's mind after the ending of Gravity Falls. The clues leading to this conclusion from fans were so complex. They actually involved traveling to real locations and solving puzzles. Sean Connery, John Patrick Mason, in The Rock was actually 007 who was captured while conducting espionage in the USA, after the events of the last Bond film with Connery, Diamonds Are Forever, then imprisoned at Alcatraz. Pokédex entries are written by young trainers. When a professor sends a bunch of 10-year-olds out into the world to document Pokemon, of course the research can't be expected to be professional in the least. This is how we end up with the creepy legends of ghost Pokemon that might have been passed around as playground rumors, or impossible facts like Macargo being hotter than the actual sun. There's no reason why out of all the Pokemon professors, one of them couldn't have revised their dex information and correct the tidbit about Pidgeot breaking the speed of light or Gardevoir creating black holes or Blazikens jumping over 30-story buildings. It's likely they leave the kids to their own devices without bothering to fact check, and kids, being kids, are going to exaggerate. In Disney's Ratatouille, the old lady in the beginning of the movie living in the house next to the river is the food critic, Anton Ego's mother. In the flashback scene where he eats the ratatouille you can see similarities of the house from the beginning, her face and I think the bridge. That explains Remy being able to make the ratatouille that tasted exactly like his mother used to make.